Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are looking back at the Gentleman's Magazine from June 1800. And this article is entitled Retrospect of the 18th Century Essay 5. So this is part 5 of a series. And previously we have seen a really fast retrospective of the 17th century. And now slowly we're going through the 18th. We started with the reigns of William and Mary. And then we covered quite thoroughly the reign of Queen Anne, especially considering it was only about 15 years. So I think it was even less than that, 10. Anyways, we are ready to move on to continue on. I sincerely hope we will actually be continuing on because I thought we were done with Queen Anne the last time, but I guess we weren't. So now we are moving on, hopefully. So let's discuss, I believe this will be about the succession because that was a very heated debate at the time of who would succeed Queen Anne. So let's find out. Let's find out together. Retrospect of the 18th Century Essay 5. During the reign of Anne, the nation had to deplore the setting of the two bright luminaries, Mr. Locke and Sir John Holt, Knight, two more estimable characters. Perhaps Britain never was blessed with at any one period, and whole excellencies live and will live in the grateful remembrance of every lover of honesty, jurisprudence, and literature. Okay, I guess we're focusing now on some prominent people, John Locke was born at Rington, near Bristol, in 1632. Then he was old, He was like 80 years old at this point. Okay, his father was an attorney, and he had a command in the Parliament Army during the Civil War. His education commenced at Westminster School and was completed at Christ Church College in Oxford. Having a propensity to the healing art, he directed his studies into the necessary channel, intending to fix his residence in his favorite city of Oxford. But it was not answering his expectation. In 1664, he was appointed secretary to the British envoy at the court of Brandenburg. Is that Brandenburg? That's the German town? Okay. That's, if I'm not mistaken, I think that's it's near Berlin, I wonder why. Soon quitting this situation, he returned to Oxford, where accidentally becoming acquainted with Lord Ashley, the foundation of his future happiness and celebrity was secured. For in his lordship he found a sincere and generous patron, who not only introduced him to the attention of the noble and great, but by his interest procured for him those situations in life which gave him leisure to pursue the studies necessary to the accomplishment of the great works he then had in contemplation. Okay. Wasn't John Locke a writer? I thought he was an author. Okay. We shall find out. I might be wrong. The next appointment which he held under government was the secretaryship of presentations, but this he lost when his patron, now become Lord Shaftesbury, was deprived of the seals. Soon after, he was made secretary to the Board of Trade, and continued in that situation till it was dissolved in 1674. Returning to his studentship at Christ Church in 1675, he took his degree of Bachelor in Medicine. Okay, and on account of ill health, shortly after visited Montpellier and some other places on the continent. Okay. On the disgrace of Lord Shaftesbury in 1679, having returned to England, he retired to Holland to avoid the vengeance of the court, which during his absence deprived him of his studentship. From this time he remained in exile till the arrival of the Prince of Orange, and from the proceedings of the government it was certainly most prudent for him to do so, for although a pardon was offered to him, and which he treated with that contempt it deserved, yet upon the invasion of the Duke of Monmouth, till they still doubted his sincerity, and formally requested his apprehension through their envoy at The Hague, and he eluded their vigilance and continued in safety. What did he do that was so bad? I mean, he was a student and then he left because for political reasons, is what I understood. Like, what does that need a pardon? Geez, did he kill somebody or something? Like, I don't understand why he would need to be pardoned. I'm solidly going to look up John Locke afterwards. That's, I have no idea what's going on here. During his exile, he entered into the closest intimacy with Leclerc, Limburg, and other members of the literary society at Amsterdam, and while abroad, he composed his principal work, the Essay on Human Understanding, a work which will never be forgotten while time shall last, and which will endear his memory to every lover of literature and give a permanence to the English language not surpassed by any of the labors of our most favored authors. Essay on Human Understanding. On the accomplishment of the Revolution, his interest was great, and his abilities such as would have ensured him the appointment to some of the most honorable, if not most lucrative, situations. But as his modesty was to be equalled only by his learning, he was content with being appointed a Commissioner of Appeals. In 1695 he was made a Commissioner of Trade and Plantations, but this office he filled for the short space of 5 years only, for the asthmatic complaint, to which he had been subject nearly through life, now rapidly gaining on him, he took up his permanent abode at Oates, in Essex, the seat of Sir Francis Masham, where for some years he had been most kindly and generously entertained by his hospitable proprietor, continuing gradually to decline till October 1704, and on the 28th of that month, he, with the greatest calmness and resignation, delivered up his soul into the hands of his merciful and beneficent Creator. Though the character of this great and good man deserves the pen of the most able biographer, and has had far greater justice done to it than either my limits or abilities will allow, yet it would be unpardonable, having thus far noticed the man, not to attempt to portray some of the excellencies of his mind and heart. I'm not sure why they're doing this deep dive on John Locke, because he wasn't even really in that century. This is called Retrospect of the 18th century. The only thing that he did during the 18th century was die. So, not sure why that's relevant, but hey. From his earliest life, he was remarked to be particularly attentive to the subjects under his consideration, and having made considerable progress in his education, his thoughts appeared to be directed principally to the sources whence he drew those inestimable works, which have as much pleased as they have profited mankind. He possessed a certain urbanity of manners and an ingenious turn of mind which rendered him not only amusing but deeply instructive, and though his powers were formed from the closest investigation of the most abstruse speculations, yet he could unbend himself with the greatest facility and propriety, and enter into the freedom and vivacity of the most polite circles. But this appeared to arise more from a desire to conform to what is considered as an evidence of good breeding, than from natural inclinations, and as he most particularly shone when the conversation took a serious and contemplative turn, then was manifest the knowledge which he had accumulated by intense study, and somewhat of the extent to that capacity which was so amply stored with the requisites necessary to form the accomplished scholar, and which did afterwards furnish the world with some of its most invaluable treasures. His works, which are various, proves that he was calculated to shine either as a politician, a polemic, or a divine. In each of these characters his labors were such as would have ensured him general respect and renown, but his essay on human understanding alone would have entitled him to one of the first niches in the Temple of Fame, and consequently enrolled his name among the first of the British worthies, for therein the reasoning faculty is not only directed into the right channel, but its boundaries are most accurately defined, and thereby we are taught how to separate truth from error, and how to substantiate every argument in the defense of the former, whether natural or revealed. Though he had condescended to investigate thoroughly the most common, and as they are generally considered the most trifling concerns of life, and reduced even these to a system and order, and yet the close of his life manifested that all his speculations on the works of nature and art tended chiefly to the enriching of his mind with the most comprehensive knowledge of, deepest veneration for, and sincerest devotion to the great author of all things. Seeing his end approaching, he relinquished all other pursuits, and confining himself to the revealed will of his God, he found in the Scriptures that strong consolation and hope which they are so admirably calculated to convey in the mind of every sincere inquirer after effectual truth. Essential truth, yeah. Thus died the man who, if there had been any deceit or subterfuge in Christianity, had been the most likely of all others to have discovered it, and whose honesty was such that not the sanction of 6,000 years, nor the opinions of the whole world would have deterred him from giving its proper exposure. But seeing he died in the faith, let the witlings, yeah? I think it says witlings, but I'm not sure that's what it says. Let the witlings and puny infidels of the day mistrust their imbecile speculations, and advertising to the pure channels of real information, may they be constrained to lay aside their philosophy, falsely so called, and be enabled to follow him as he followed Christ. So shall they find with him that the end of the righteous man is peace and assurance forever. The other excellent character which we have now to portray is that of Sir John Holt. Okay, now we're moving on. So let me just come back to John Locke. This guy who's writing about him seems to be a fan, and he seems to be a very faithful, believing Christian, which I can respect. However, I feel like you are taking evidence where there is none, and saying that because this one person believes in something, it must be true. Yeah, that's not true. People can be deceived by things. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm saying that the way that he's presenting his evidence is flawed. Okay? Like, you can prove things in other ways. You don't have to point out that a certain person believed something and therefore it must be true. I'm just saying. I will look them up in just a moment. I feel like this author is going off the rails a little bit, and it makes me reluctant to continue reading this series. So I'm going to have to do some thinking of whether or not I want to continue the series or if I'm ready to move on. Anyway, let's at least see what he had to say about whoever else he's talking about. So, the other excellent character which we have now to portray is that of Sir John Holt, who was born in in Oxfordshire in 1642, and was the son of Sir Thomas Holt, recorder at Abington. After a proper continuance of the grammar method, at that place he was entered into Oriel College, Oxford, which he left at the age of 17 to prosecute his studies at Gray's Inn, where he made such progress as soon to attain a degree of public sanction and respect, being made Recorder of London March 5, 1685 to 6, the office at that time being under the appointment of the court. He manifested the greatest patriotism, and was knighted by his strenuous opposition to the abolition of the rest, and the dispensing power to the king. Deprived him of his situation, but obtained him the applause and interest of the people at large. At the commencement of the Convention Parliament, he was chosen a member and appointed a manager on the part of the Commons, and throughout the whole of the important business manifested the most consummate knowledge of the laws of his country, the tenderest solicitude for the rights of the people, equally respecting the just prerogative of the Crown, and guarding and securing the liberties of the subject, in a word, laying the foundation for the glorious Constitution which we now enjoy. So he was a lawyer? And he helped write the Constitution, is what I understand. Okay, that's a good reason to write about him. Then I understand that. Like, he makes much more sense to me to talk about in an 18th century retrospect than John Locke. Okay? John Holt is much more influential to the way the country was shaped, yes? On May 4, 1689, he was appointed Lord Chief Justice of the King's Bench, and sworn of the Privy Council to King William and Queen Mary, and throughout the long period of 21 years filled that honourable station with the greatest credit to himself and benefit to the nation. Strongly attached to the liberty of the subject, he suffered it in no instance to be infringed on under his jurisdiction, and though this inflexible justice exposed him to the displeasure of both Houses of Parliament, In the case of Lord Banbury, etc., yet the greatest authority could not shake his integrity, as his noble determination was that he should know nothing but the discharge of his duty. Okay. In 1700, on the resignation of Lord Chancellor Somers, he most modestly refused the Great Seal, though earnestly solicited by His Majesty to accept it, and with the greatest diligence and unshaken fidelity filled the office of Lord Chief Justice, till March 5, 1709 or 10, when his useful life was terminated by lingering illness, which he bore with Christian fortitude and resignation in the 68th year of his age. Though the juvenile days of the Lord Chief Justice appear to have been marked with a considerable degree of levity, not to say indiscretion, yet no sooner was he called into active life than he manifested all that his solidity and circumspection which became his situation in him was truly conspicuous. The upright judge, unappalled by the frowns of authority or the contempt of the vulgar, he knew no bias but the laws of the land, the dictates of his conscience, and the will of his God. Possessing himself a due sense of liberty, the strictest honesty, fidelity, and loyalty, he was not only cherished these virtues in others, but ever defended them with the most unshaken perseverance and determination, so that on the whole of his conduct we may say that the bench was never filled by a judge who administered the laws of the country with more fidelity to his sovereign, more to the happiness of the subject, or with more honor to himself than Lord Chief Justice Holt. T. Mott, FSM. Wow. I need some water. That was long. Okay, let's do some fact-checking because it annoys me when it's not true. So let's start out with John Locke. Now, so far, this guy has been really on point as far as, facts go. However, I just don't feel like you can say that necessarily about all of these people, especially since he's now listing a bunch of people that I know nothing about and don't really seem to be as significant to the history as than, for example, the monarchs. Yeah? There are some people that are as important as the monarchs were, but there were, I don't know if these were some of them. Anyway, so let's start out with John Locke. It sounds to me, to be honest, that this guy was just a fan of John Locke. All right, born 1632, died 1704. Yeah, that sounds like him. Yeah, was an English philosopher and physician, widely regarded as the most influential Enlightenment thinkers and commonly known as the father of liberalism, considered one of the first of the British empiricists, following the tradition of Francis Bacon. Locke is equally important to social contract theory. His work greatly affected the development of epistemology. What's epistemology? Hang on. Is the branch of philosophy concerned with knowledge that is considered a major subfield of philosophy. Okay. And political philosophy. His writings influenced Voltaire and Jean-Jacques Rousseau and many Scottish Enlightenment thinkers, as well as the American revolutionaries. His contributions to classical republicanism and liberal theory are reflected in the United States Declaration of Independence. Interesting. Huh. Internationally, Locke's political legal principles continue to have a profound influence on the theory and practice of limited representative government and the protection of basic rights and freedoms under the rule of law. Law's theory of mind is often cited as the origin of modern conceptions of identity and the self, figuring prominently in the work of later philosophies such as Jean-Jacques Rousseau, David Hume, and Immanuel Kant. He postulated that at birth the mind was a blank slate, or a tabula rasa. Contrary to Cartesian philosophy based on pre-existing concepts, he maintained that we are born without innate ideas, and that knowledge is instead determined only by experience derived from sense perception, a concept now known as empiricism. Interesting. I'm actually going to skip over his life story a little bit. I do want to know why he fled, though. Why did he have to leave? So I'm going to try and find that part. Okay, so here it says the Netherlands. Locke fled to the Netherlands in 1683 under strong suspicion of involvement in the Rye House plot. Okay, the Rye House plot of 1683 was a plan to assassinate King Charles II. Okay, and his brother James, Duke of York. The royal party went from Westminster to Newmarket to see horse races and were expected to make the return journey. Okay, and so it was during that time that they made an assassination attempt. So they thought that's, okay, they didn't explain that in the article, yes? That makes sense. If they thought that he was involved, whether or not he was, that he would flee, that he would, flee the country, yeah? Although there was little evidence to suggest that he was directly involved in the scheme, so it sounds like he was kind of framed for it, yeah? The philosopher and novelist Rebecca Neuberger Goldstein argues that during his 5 years in Holland, Locke chose his friends from among the same free-thinking members of dissenting Protestant groups as Spinoza's small group of loyal confidants. Locke almost certainly met men in Amsterdam who spoke of the ideas of that renegade Jew who insisted on identifying himself through his religion of reason alone, while she says that Locke's strong empiricist tendencies would have disinclined him to read a grandly metaphysical work such as Spinoza's Ethics. In other words, he was deeply receptive to Spinoza's ideas, most particularly to the rationalist's well-thought-out argument for political and religious tolerance and the necessity of the separation of church and state. Interesting. In the Netherlands, Locke had time to return to his writing, spending a great deal of time working on the essay concerning human understanding and composing the letter on toleration. Yeah? Locke did not return home until after the Glorious Revolution. Locke accompanied Mary II back to England in 1689. The bulk of Locke's publishing took place upon his return from exile. His aforementioned essay concerning human understanding, which this author was a huge fan of, the 2 treatises of government, and a letter considering toleration, all appearing in quick succession. Locke's closest friend, Lady Masham, invited him to join her at Otts, the Masham's country house in Essex. Although this time was marked by variable health from asthma attacks, they mentioned that, yeah? He nevertheless became an intellectual hero of the Whigs. During this period, he discussed matters such as figures as John Dryden and Isaac Newton. All right, and then he died, in 1704, which I was aware of, yeah. Events that happened during Locke's lifetime include the English Restoration, the Great Plague of London, the Great Fire of London, and the Glorious Revolution. He did not see the Act of Union of 1707, but the thrones of England and Scotland were held in personal union throughout his lifetime. Constitutional monarchy and parliamentary democracy were in their infancy during Locke's lifetime. Okay. So I can see why he was influential, but I don't feel like that was expressed very well in the article. I will admit that it was an influential person in England at the time, and I think that it makes sense to talk about him. However, it's not... I wish that had been expressed better in the article, of saying this person was not really alive very long during the 18th century. However, he had a very strong influence on it, which is why I'm mentioning him here. If that had just been explained by the author, I think I would have, been on his side. But now let's look up John Holt, who seemed to be more directly involved in this. A Jamaican singer. No, that's not him. How about Sir John Holt? Yeah? Lord Chief Justice. That sounds better, yeah. 1642 to 1710. Yeah? That's him. Okay, Sir John Holt was an English lawyer who served as Lord Chief Justice of England from 17 April 1689 to his death. He is frequently credited with playing a major role in ending the prosecution of witches in English law. I did not know that. I wish he had mentioned that. I wish this author had mentioned that, because I find that very interesting. So, goes through his, biography, but honestly, I think I'm gonna just read, part of it near the end. Okay, in 1685-86, Holt was appointed Recorder of London, and about the same time he was made the King's Sergeant and received the honour of knighthood. His giving a decision to adverse He is giving a decision adverse to the pretensions of the king to exercise martial law in time of peace, led to his dismissal from the office of recorder, but he was continued in the office of king's sergeant in order to prevent him from becoming counsel for accused persons. Having been one of the judges who acted as assessors to the peers in the Convention Parliament, he took a leading part in arranging constitutional change by which William III was called to the throne, and after his succession he was appointed Lord Chief Justice of the King's Bench. He is best known for the firmness with which he upheld his own prerogatives in opposition to the authority of the Houses of Parliament. While in sympathy with the Whig party, Holt maintained on the bench political impartiality and held himself aloof from political intrigue. Good for him. On the retirement of Somers from the chancellorship in 1700, Holt was offered the Great Seal, but denied it. He died in London on 5 March 1710 and was buried in the chancel of Redgrave Church. His magnificent monument was sculpted by Thomas Green. Not important. Okay, witchcraft trials. Historian John Callows argues in his 2002 book, The Last Witches of England, that skeptical jurists, especially Holt, had already largely stopped convictions for witchcraft under English law even before the Witchcraft Act of 1735 finally concluded such persecutions. Callow particularly credits Holt with great courage in doing so in the face of religious pressure, mob violence, and popular superstitious belief in witchcraft. Good for him! I say my hat's off to you, Sir John Holt. That's awesome. So yeah, he does sound to be quite influential at the time of being, a figure that was very important to the history of the country and to the shaping of it in the future. Being an extremely fair and impartial judge, saying, I don't see any evidence that this person is a witch. Yeah? I'm not seeing it. And just refusing to condemn somebody to death because somebody else thought that they were a witch, like that does take a lot of courage, especially in view of a mob facing him at the same time. That is impressive. So my hat's off to you, Sir John Holt. Thank you very much for all of the wonderful work that you have done in the past. Anyway, I found that really interesting. It was not what I was expecting, but I hope it wasn't too disappointing for you. And if you did like the video, please subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.